My husband was officially voted the weakest Omega in my company, and somehow he was the only person in the room who thought it was funny. The whole thing happened during our annual company retreat, where someone in human resources had approved a ridiculous team game, ranking everything from strongest coffee addiction to most intimidating alpha presence. Then came the alpha and omega rankings. I already hated the idea. Caleb, naturally, was eating a chocolate chip cookie and treating the entire event like free entertainment. When his name appeared at the bottom under weakest omega, several people laughed. I did not. Well, Caleb said beside me, brushing crumbs from his sweater, at least I won something. You came last. Details. My husband was 26, slim, soft-spoken, and possessed such a faint omega scent that strangers occasionally assumed he used suppressants. He did not. People saw his light blonde hair, quiet blue-gray eyes, and polite smile, and immediately decided he needed protecting. To be fair, Caleb encouraged the misunderstanding. He handed me jars he claimed were impossible to open. He once called carrying 2 grocery bags at once reckless alpha behavior. Last winter, he spent 10 minutes looking for his glasses before I pointed out they were sitting on his head. So when Victor Hale, one of our senior executives, looked at the ranking and said, "Harmless suits you, Caleb," everyone expected my husband to laugh. Caleb did. I have been called worse. Victor smiled in that particular way certain alphas did when they wanted everyone to notice their status without explicitly mentioning it. Mason certainly does not have to worry about you challenging him. My jaw tightened. Caleb touched my arm. "Do not," he murmured. "I have an excellent comeback involving his tie, and I would hate for you to ruin it." I nearly smiled. Then the atmosphere changed. It was subtle at first, a deliberate alpha pressure spreading around our table. Conversations nearby quieted. One omega across from us shifted uncomfortably. Another lowered his eyes. Victor was testing Caleb. I straightened immediately. "Victor." Caleb touched my wrist again. His expression had not changed. Victor increased the pressure. Caleb picked up his lemonade and took a sip. Nothing. No tension. No lowered gaze. Not even irritation. He simply looked at Victor with mild curiosity. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Victor's confident expression began to crack. Caleb finally tilted his head. Was something supposed to happen? Silence swallowed the table. Victor stared at him. I stared at him. Caleb looked between us. "What? You did not feel that?" I asked. "Feel what?" Victor immediately withdrew the pressure. Caleb glanced around at everyone's expressions and slowly set down his glass. "Oh." He sounded more embarrassed than concerned. Was that an alpha thing? I had been married to Caleb for 2 years. I knew how he took his coffee. I knew he hated thunderstorms, but loved listening to rain. I knew he stole the left side of the bed despite insisting he preferred the right. Yet sitting beside him that afternoon, I realized there was something fundamental about my husband I had never understood. Everyone in that room had just watched the weakest omega fail to react to something every omega was supposed to notice. Caleb calmly reached for another cookie. Victor watched him differently now. So did I. And for the first time, the word harmless no longer seemed to fit. For the next 3 days, I tried to convince myself the retreat incident had been a fluke. Caleb made that difficult by continuing to behave exactly like Caleb. Sunday morning, he wandered into the kitchen wearing my favorite gray sweatshirt, handed me a jar of strawberry preserves, and said, "This has defeated me." I looked at the lid. "You are serious?" "Completely. You ignored Victor Hale's alpha pressure like he was an air conditioner, but breakfast preserves are your limit?" Caleb blinked innocently. Different skill set. I opened the jar. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and stole the first piece of toast. Somehow that should have reassured me. Instead, I started noticing things. Monday evening, I came home complaining about a supplier named Dalton Freight. They wanted us to renew a major contract, and Victor was pushing hard for approval. Caleb was sitting on the couch with his reading glasses on top of his head while searching beneath a cushion for them. "They are on your head," I said. He reached up. I knew that. Obviously. I dropped beside him and loosened my tie. "Victor says Dalton is offering us their best rate." Caleb stopped searching. "Victor is lying." I turned toward him. "Excuse me. Or Dalton is lying to Victor, which would be more embarrassing for him. You have never met anyone from Dalton." "No, you have never seen the contract." "Also no. Then how could you possibly know that?" Caleb held out his hand. "Give me your phone." "Why?" Because watching you struggle toward the answer is becoming painful. I handed it over. He opened the 3 emails I had shown him earlier while complaining about work. First email, he said, they call the fuel surcharge temporary. Second email, they describe it as standardized. Third email, they refuse to define when it expires. He scrolled. Then Victor says their rate is 12% below the nearest competitor, but Dalton only promises 8% in writing. I frowned. That could be sloppy wording. It could. Caleb handed back my phone. And your neighbor could be mowing his lawn at 9:30 tonight because he loves gardening. Right on cue, a lawn mower started outside. I stared at the window. Caleb smiled. Mr. Patterson received a warning from the Homeowners Association this morning. He always overreacts. How do you know he got a warning? He complained about it to Mrs. Ellis while I collected the mail. And how did you know he would mow tonight? Because he said, and I quote, they want the grass shorter, they will get shorter. I looked at my husband. Do you just listen to everybody? Mostly. Why? Caleb's expression shifted. The humor remained, but something quieter appeared behind it. Because people say remarkable things around someone they consider unimportant. That sentence stayed with me. The following morning, I asked our finance team to review Dalton's proposal again. By lunch, they found additional fees buried in an attachment that would have erased most of the promised savings. Victor called it an oversight. Caleb called it predictable. That night, I found him curled on the couch with a mystery novel, looking about as dangerous as a blanket. You were right, I said. I know. You could pretend to be surprised. That sounds exhausting. I sat beside him. How often do you notice things like this? Caleb turned a page. Like what? Things everyone else misses. He went still for the smallest fraction of a second. Then he looked at me and smiled. More often than everyone else notices. And suddenly I wondered whether being overlooked had ever been Caleb's weakness at all. 3 days later, Caleb accidentally walked into a meeting with 6 senior executives and found a problem none of us had noticed in 2 weeks. To be fair, he was not supposed to be there. I had left my lunch on the kitchen counter, and because my husband apparently considered feeding me part of his marital responsibilities, he drove 20 minutes downtown to deliver it. I was sitting in a conference room with Victor, our finance director, 2 attorneys, and 3 department heads reviewing documents for a possible acquisition when Caleb appeared at the glass door holding a paper bag. You forgot this, he said. Victor glanced at him and smiled. Mason's personal delivery service. Caleb smiled back. The benefits are terrible, but the customer is handsome. I heard one of the attorneys laugh. I stood to take the bag. Thank you. Turkey sandwich. No mustard. This is why I married you. I assumed it was my sparkling personality. Caleb was about to leave when Victor asked one of the attorneys to pass him the acquisition summary. The folder crossed directly in front of Caleb. His eyes dropped to the page for maybe 2 seconds. Then he stopped. I recognized that pause now. What? I asked. Nothing. Caleb. Victor sighed. We are in the middle of something. Caleb looked at him. I noticed. There was no attitude in his voice, which somehow made the answer worse. He looked back at the document. Can I ask a question? Victor leaned into his chair. About an acquisition you know nothing about? That would be the one. I should have redirected the conversation. Instead, curiosity won. Ask. Caleb pointed toward a section. Near the bottom of the page without touching it. Why is the same consulting fee listed through 3 different subsidiaries? Silence. Victor frowned. It is not. Caleb tilted his head. Hale Strategic Services, Northfield Advisory, and Crestline Management. Our finance director immediately pulled the document closer. Those are separate vendors. Maybe. Caleb shifted the lunch bag to his other hand. But they use the same mailing address. Every person at the table looked down. Victor's expression hardened. How would you know that? Caleb pointed again. It is printed underneath each company name. The finance director flipped through several pages. He is right. One of the attorneys opened her laptop. Victor closed the folder in front of him. This is an administrative detail. Caleb looked at the folder, then at Victor. Then it should be easy to explain. Victor did not answer. That was the moment the room changed. Nobody was looking at Caleb like Mason Reed's quiet Omega husband anymore. The finance director began asking questions. The attorneys started comparing payment schedules. One department head requested the vendor disclosures. Caleb stepped backward. I should let you work. I followed him into the hallway. You saw all of that in 2 seconds. Closer to 6. That does not make it normal. He handed me the lunch bag. Eat before 3 this time. Caleb. He sighed. Mason. Numbers repeat. Addresses repeat. People assume nobody will compare them. And you compare them. Sometimes. Through the glass wall behind us, I saw Victor watching Caleb. Not dismissively. Not anymore. Caleb noticed too. His expression remained gentle, but his voice dropped. Do me a favor. What? Do not mention what I noticed to anyone outside that room. Why? He looked at Victor one last time. Because if those companies are connected, someone worked very hard to make them look separate. Then Caleb kissed my cheek, reminded me to eat my sandwich, and walked toward the elevators as calmly as if he had not just changed the direction of a multi-million-dollar meeting. I watched him leave and realized something unsettling. Caleb had not stumbled onto that inconsistency because he was lucky. He had known exactly where to look. That evening, I learned there was one thing more unsettling than discovering my husband could spot hidden financial patterns in seconds. Watching a complete stranger recognize him before Caleb said a single word. We had stayed downtown later than planned because the acquisition review turned into 3 additional meetings, 2 emergency calls, and Victor repeatedly insisting the duplicate addresses were probably clerical errors. Caleb waited for me at a coffee shop nearby. By the time we reached the underground parking garage, it was almost 8:30. I saved your company several hours of embarrassment, Caleb said as we walked toward my truck. I think that earns me dinner. You brought me lunch. That was before I became an unpaid financial consultant. Fine. Tacos. Now you are speaking my language. We were about 20 feet from the truck when Caleb stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. I followed his gaze. An older white man in a charcoal overcoat stood near a concrete pillar beneath the fluorescent lights. He looked ordinary enough, but his attention was fixed entirely on Caleb. Ren, he said. Caleb went completely still. I stepped forward automatically. Can I help you? The man barely looked at me. I was hoping I had the wrong person. You do, Caleb said. His voice made me turn toward him. It was still quiet, still controlled, but the warmth had disappeared. I had heard my husband irritated, tired, embarrassed, and once deeply offended by a restaurant charging $14 for grilled cheese. I had never heard him sound like this. The stranger studied him. 6 years, and that is all you have to say? You have the wrong person. No, the man gave a humorless little smile. I spent 6 years hoping I did. I moved slightly in front of Caleb. His hand immediately closed around my sleeve and gently pulled me sideways. Mason. What? Stand beside me. 3 words. Calmly spoken. Somehow they stopped me more effectively than an argument would have. I moved next to him. The stranger noticed. You never used to bring anyone into your problems. Caleb's expression did not change. He is not in my problems. He became part of them the moment Hale noticed what you can do. My stomach tightened. Victor. The man finally looked at me. You should ask your husband. Do not, Caleb said. The stranger returned his attention to him. Still protecting information before people. Still confusing curiosity with entitlement. For the first time, the man looked uncomfortable. That surprised me. He had approached us. He knew Caleb. Yet somehow Caleb was controlling the conversation without raising his voice. If Hale is involved, the stranger said, you know where this leads. No, Caleb replied. I know where it used to lead. The man reached into his coat slowly and produced a plain business card. He placed it on the hood of a nearby car instead of approaching us. Call before you decide you do not need help. Then he walked toward the elevators. I waited until the doors closed behind him. Ren. Caleb exhaled. Not here. That man knew you. Yes. He knew Victor. Apparently. And he looked more nervous talking to you than you looked talking to him. Caleb stared at the business card from several feet away. That is because he remembers me differently. I looked at my husband. Differently how? For a moment, something unreadable passed through his blue-gray eyes. Then he picked up the card by its edge. Before I met you, people underestimated me for a living. I thought about the company retreat, the contract, Victor's expression, and the stranger calling him Ren. Doing what? Caleb looked at me, and for once there was no joke waiting behind his answer. Finding the things powerful people were desperate to keep hidden. Caleb waited until we were home before explaining why a stranger in a parking garage knew him as Ren, which gave me 20 minutes to imagine increasingly ridiculous possibilities. By the time we entered the kitchen, I had mentally promoted my husband from mysterious research assistant to international mastermind. Caleb put the business card on the counter. Before you ask, I was not a spy. That was going to be question 4. What were the first 3? Who was Ren? Who was that man? And why did he look like you knew where all his secrets were buried? Caleb removed his coat. That last one is complicated. Naturally. He made coffee before answering, because apparently life-changing revelations in our marriage required caffeine. Then he sat across from me. Ren was a professional name. I worked as a confidential forensic researcher, meaning clients hired our team when ordinary audits could not explain what was happening. Hidden ownership, fraudulent billing, coercive contracts, shell companies, conflicts of interest. I thought about the acquisition documents. Like 3 consulting companies sharing one address. Exactly like that. And you were good at it. Caleb looked into his coffee. Very. There was no pride in the answer. That unsettled me more than boasting would have. Why Ren? Real names created unnecessary exposure. And why you? He gave me a faint smile. Look at me, Mason. I did. Slim frame. Light blonde hair. Soft sweater. Quiet blue-gray eyes. The same Omega who had handed me an impossible strawberry jar 3 mornings earlier. People underestimated you, I said. Constantly. Caleb folded his hands around his mug. Powerful alphas would discuss things around me they would never discuss around another alpha. Executives left documents visible. Clients assumed I was an assistant. People explained sensitive decisions in front of me because they believed I was too harmless to understand them. And you let them believe it. It made my job easier. Suddenly dozens of tiny things made sense. The listening. The details. The way Caleb could reconstruct an entire problem from fragments everyone else ignored. Did you ever do anything illegal? I asked. No, the answer came immediately. No breaking into systems. No stealing records. No threats. I analyzed information our clients obtained legally and found connections other people missed. Relief loosened something in my chest. Then why stop? Caleb was quiet for several seconds. Because eventually I stopped meeting people. What does that mean? I met patterns, motives, contradictions. If someone smiled at me, I wondered what they wanted. If someone was kind, I looked for leverage. I could walk into a room and start turning everyone into evidence before they finished introducing themselves. His voice had become softer. I did not like who that made me. So you left. I disappeared professionally. Ren disappeared. I became an archivist, met you, and built a life where the most suspicious thing I usually investigate is why you keep putting empty milk cartons back in the refrigerator. Those allegations remain unproven. Caleb laughed quietly. I reached across the table and took his hand. Why did you never tell me? His smile faded. Because you liked taking care of me. Caleb, I liked it too. His thumb moved across my fingers. For once, being underestimated did not feel useful. With you, it felt safe. That landed harder than I expected. Then I remembered the parking garage. The man said Victor noticed what you can do. Caleb's expression changed immediately. Yes. So this is not finished. No. And Victor might know about Ren. Caleb looked toward the business card on the counter. If he does, the consulting fees are not the real problem. I felt my stomach tighten. What is? Caleb met my eyes. Whatever Victor is afraid I am going to find next. The next morning, Caleb showed me the first document that explained why people who knew Ren never used the word harmless. He had disappeared into our home office before breakfast, and when I walked in carrying coffee, I found him sitting on the floor beside an old storage box. I thought we agreed on fewer surprises, I said. We agreed on honesty. That sounds suspiciously different. Caleb pulled out a thin folder. This is everything I kept from that period of my life. Inside were old contracts, training evaluations, and sanitized case summaries with client names removed. Near the bottom was a single assessment sheet. I read the first line aloud. Ren. Classification, Omega. Non-aggressive. I glanced at Caleb. At least they got one thing right. Keep reading. My eyes moved lower. Extreme informational risk, if underestimated. I looked up. Caleb was drinking coffee like that sentence described someone else. Extreme? The assessment system was dramatic. You were classified as an extreme risk. Informational risk. That distinction is not helping. His mouth twitched. I turned to the case summaries. One involved invoices routed through 4 vendors that eventually led back to the same owner. Another described a property acquisition hidden behind overlapping limited liability companies. A third involved contract language designed to quietly transfer decision-making authority after a merger. Caleb had found connections teams of attorneys and accountants had overlooked. Nothing in the files suggested force, threats, or anything illegal. The danger was simpler. Once Caleb started asking questions, lies became difficult to maintain. "How did you do this?" I asked. "Mostly patience." "That is annoyingly modest." "Fine. Patience and color-coded spreadsheets." "Terrifying." He smiled, but I noticed the expression did not reach his eyes. I closed the folder. "Why did you really leave?" Caleb stared at the window. "I told you. You told me you stopped seeing people and started seeing patterns. That sounds like the result, not the reason." He was silent long enough that I knew I had finally reached the question he had hoped I would not ask. "There was a case," he said. "A company was being investigated for financial manipulation. I found the structure behind it. I was right about everything." "Then what went wrong?" "Nothing professionally." His fingers tightened around the mug. "That was the problem. Everyone congratulated me. The client was thrilled. My team celebrated. And all I could think about was how easy it had become." He looked at me. I could sit across from someone, listen to them talk about their family, their plans, their fears, and still reduce every sentence to useful information. I realized I was proud of being impossible to fool, but I was becoming impossible to know. The room went quiet. "So Ren disappeared," I said. "Yes." "And Caleb stayed." His expression softened. "Caleb learned how to make dinner, forget where he left his glasses, and marry an alpha who believes empty milk cartons are someone else's responsibility. Still unproven." He laughed. I reached for the assessment again. "There is one thing I do not understand. At the retreat, Victor used alpha pressure. Why did it barely affect you?" Caleb leaned back against the desk. "My scent response has always been unusually muted. It was one reason my old team recruited me. Alpha pressure registers, but it does not overwhelm me the way people expect." That finally closed the first mystery. Then I noticed a handwritten note at the bottom of the assessment. 3 words. "Never assume retirement." "Caleb." His smile vanished when he saw where I was looking. "Who wrote that?" Before he could answer, his laptop chimed. A new email had arrived from an unfamiliar address. Caleb read the subject line and went completely still. I leaned closer. It contained only 4 words. "Hale knows about Ren." By noon, I discovered Caleb had been investigating Victor for almost 3 weeks, which meant my husband had apparently interpreted our recent conversation about honesty as a creative suggestion. I found out when he left his laptop open on the kitchen table while making coffee. A spreadsheet covered the screen, filled with company names, dates, consulting payments, property records, and arrows connecting transactions I recognized from the acquisition. "Caleb." He stopped beside the coffee maker. That tone usually means I forgot something. "You forgot to mention you built an entire investigation into Victor Hale." His expression changed. "Mason, how long?" "Almost 3 weeks." 3 weeks. Technically 19 days. That correction does not help you. Caleb set down his mug. I turned the laptop toward him. "You knew something was wrong before you brought me lunch." "I suspected something was wrong." "And you said nothing." "Because suspicion is not proof." I stood. "I am your husband, Caleb. You could have told me you were worried." "And then what?" "Then I would have known." "Exactly." His answer stopped me. Caleb came closer and pointed at the spreadsheet. Victor wanted Dalton Freight approved quickly because the contract strengthens the acquisition projections. Northfield Advisory receives consulting fees from the acquisition target. Crestline Management receives payments from Northfield. Hale. Strategic Services shares administrative records with both. Victor's company? Not directly. Caleb opened another document. It belongs to a trust connected to his brother-in-law. My stomach dropped. So Victor is benefiting from the deal. That is what I am trying to prove. Trying. Caleb nodded. The pattern is clear. The legal connection is not complete yet. I looked across the table at the man I had spent 2 years believing needed help opening jars. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Caleb's face softened. "The moment I could prove it without destroying your trust in everyone around you. You do not get to make that decision for me. I was trying to protect you." I almost laughed at the irony. "Do you hear yourself?" Caleb went silent. "For 2 years, I assumed protecting you meant standing in front of you whenever something looked difficult. I was wrong. You told me that without saying it. Now you are doing the same thing to me." His eyes dropped. "That is different." "Why?" Because fear without evidence does damage. And secrets do not. That landed. Caleb looked away. I lowered my voice. You should have trusted me with the fear too. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Caleb closed the laptop. You are right. No defense. No clever answer. Just that. Somehow it made my anger harder to hold. I am still mad. You should be. That is also annoying. I have been told. His phone chimed. Caleb checked it, and whatever warmth had returned disappeared. What? I asked. He turned the screen toward me. Our finance director had sent an emergency notice. Victor had called a special board meeting for Friday morning to accelerate the acquisition vote. He knows we are looking, I said. Probably. Can you prove the connection before Friday? Caleb stared at the spreadsheet. For the first time since Ren entered our lives, he looked uncertain. Then he opened the laptop again. I do not know. I pulled out the chair beside him. Caleb glanced at me. What are you doing? You said you needed proof. I sat down. So tell me what you need. His expression shifted. Mason, this could take all night. Good thing I married someone who makes coffee. A small smile appeared. Then Caleb turned the screen so we could both see it. All right, he said. Start with Crestline. And for the first time, Ren did not investigate alone. By Friday morning, Victor believed he was walking into a board meeting he had already won. Caleb knew otherwise before we left the house. We had spent most of Thursday night following public filings, payment records, ownership disclosures, and corporate registrations until the pattern finally closed. At 7:15 that morning, Caleb stood in our kitchen wearing a gray sweater and calmly spreading strawberry preserves across toast. You are remarkably relaxed, I said. I am eating breakfast. You are about to walk into a room full of executives and expose a financial scheme. After breakfast, I stared at him. Sometimes I forget you are terrifying. Caleb handed me the jar. Could you close this? Absolutely not. I know too much now. He smiled, and for a moment he was simply my husband again. 2 hours later, the boardroom felt entirely different. Victor sat near the head of the long table with acquisition documents arranged neatly before him. Caleb entered beside me carrying one thin folder. Several board members glanced at him with polite confusion. Victor did not bother hiding his irritation. This is a board matter, Mason. I pulled out a chair. Caleb has relevant information. Victor leaned back. Your husband is an archivist. Caleb sat down. That is true. The dismissal in Victor's expression was almost familiar now. I had worn the same blindness in a kinder form for 2 years. Victor began his presentation, emphasizing projected growth, favorable freight terms, and the urgency of approving the acquisition before competitors moved. Caleb listened without interrupting. When Victor finished, Caleb opened his folder. May I ask one question? Victor sighed. If we must. Caleb placed 3 payment summaries on the table. Why did Northfield Advisory receive consulting fees from the acquisition target while transferring nearly identical amounts to Crestline Management within 72 hours? Victor barely glanced down. Independent vendors frequently conduct business with each other. Agreed. Caleb placed another page beside them. Why does Crestline then transfer administrative fees to Hale Strategic Services? The room became quieter. Victor's expression hardened. Coincidence? Possibly. Caleb added a corporate registration. Then this should also be coincidence. Hale Strategic Services is controlled by a family trust whose beneficiary is your brother-in-law. Our finance director leaned forward. Victor looked at me. You let him investigate company records. Before I could answer, Caleb did. Everything on this table comes from authorized company documents or public records. One of the attorneys began reviewing the pages. Caleb continued, never raising his voice. Dalton Freight improves the acquisition forecast. The acquisition creates consulting payments to Northfield. Northfield routes money through Crestline. Crestline pays a company connected to your family. Victor shook his head. You are constructing a story from unrelated transactions. Caleb nodded calmly. That was possible until we found this. He placed the final document down. It was an ownership disclosure filed 18 months earlier. Victor stopped moving. The attorney picked it up, read for several seconds, then looked toward the board chair. We need to suspend this vote pending independent review. Nobody spoke. Victor stared across the table at Caleb. The confidence he had carried into the room was gone. Who exactly are you? He asked. Caleb looked almost sad. The Omega you decided was not worth noticing. I felt every eye shift toward my husband. A month earlier, I would have stepped forward, explained, defended, protected. Instead, I stayed beside him. Victor gathered his papers without another argument as the board chair formally postponed the acquisition. Caleb closed his folder. Under the table, his hand found mine. I squeezed it once. Outside the conference room, I finally exhaled. So that was Ren. Caleb considered the question. Partly. And the rest? He looked at our joined hands. The rest learned he does not have to do everything alone. A month after the board meeting, nobody at Reed Logistics called Caleb harmless anymore, and my husband found this deeply inconvenient. Mrs. Lang from accounting asked whether I could analyze her neighbor's suspicious recycling schedule. He told me as we carried food into my parents' backyard for Sunday barbecue. What did you say? I told her to consider a hobby. Reasonable. Caleb adjusted the sleeves of his pale blue sweater. Then Daniel from procurement asked me to review his fantasy football strategy. Can you? Obviously. Are you going to? Absolutely not. I laughed and set a tray on the patio table. The independent review had confirmed enough of Caleb's findings for the company to cancel the acquisition and begin a formal internal process concerning Victor's undisclosed conflicts. Victor was no longer involved in company decisions while that process continued. Caleb refused every suggestion that he join our finance department. I already have a job, he reminded people. I like archives. Dead documents are less dramatic than living executives. More importantly, something between us had changed. I stopped assuming Caleb needed me to speak first whenever another alpha became difficult. Caleb stopped deciding which worries I was allowed to share. We were still learning. Sometimes I stepped forward automatically, caught myself, and moved beside him instead. Sometimes Caleb disappeared into research mode for an hour before remembering he had promised to tell me what he was thinking. Neither of us became perfect. Apparently, marriage had declined to include that feature. Halfway through lunch, my uncle noticed Caleb carrying a heavy serving bowl and immediately reached for it. Careful there. Let Mason handle that. Caleb looked at me. I looked at him. 6 weeks earlier, I would have taken the bowl without thinking. Caleb smiled politely. I have it, thank you. My uncle hesitated, remembered every story circulating through the company, and withdrew his hands as if Caleb had just announced he could calculate tax law from memory. Caleb sat beside me. See, he whispered. Now they think I am terrifying. You are terrifying. I alphabetized your spice cabinet. At 2 a.m. I could not sleep. Paprika should not require a midnight relocation. Caleb tried not to laugh. Later, while everyone cleaned up, he walked over carrying a pickle jar. Open this for me. I stared at it. Then at him. No, his blue-gray eyes widened with theatrical betrayal. Excuse me. You can open it yourself. That is a serious accusation. Caleb. Mason. I folded my arms. He sighed, placed one hand around the lid, and opened the jar immediately. I pointed at him. I knew it. Congratulations. Your investigative career is flourishing. How long? How long what? How long have you been pretending you cannot open jars? Caleb considered lying, apparently decided that was no longer wise, and said, since our 3rd date. I stared at him. 2 years of marriage. Plus dating. You manipulated me with pickles. I prefer to call it relationship maintenance. I started laughing so hard my mother looked over from across the yard. Caleb smiled and handed me the open jar. Why? I asked when I could finally speak. His expression softened. Because I like when you take care of me. The answer silenced every joke I had prepared. Even though you do not need me to. Especially then. He reached for my hand. Needing help and choosing care are different things. I understood that now. Everyone had been wrong to believe Caleb's gentleness made him weak. I had been wrong in a kinder way. Believing strength meant he should never need protecting, comforting, or caring for at all. Caleb squeezed my fingers. I took the pickle jar from him anyway. He smiled. The world had spent years underestimating my husband because he was quiet. Now some people overestimated him because they knew what Ren could do. I finally understood both versions missed the point. Caleb did not have to be weak for me to care for him, and he did not have to be dangerous to deserve respect. He only had to be himself, and I only had to stand beside him.